One of the things I learned last year, I was doing a series of biblical lectures, and I started to analyze the Abrahamic stories, which I didn't know very well. And the story of Abraham is particularly interesting because he's a slow starter. He's one of those guys that failed to launch, right? He's in his father's tent, hanging around his mother's skirts till he's 80. And 80, that's exactly it. And God finally gets fed up with him and says, look, why don't you get the hell out of the tent and get out there in the world and have an adventure? You know, your life is waiting for you. And well, it's God calling, so Abraham has enough sense to pack up and leave, but it's complete bloody catastrophe from there on in, you know. I mean, the first thing he encounters is a famine, and that's no joke, and then it's a tyranny, that's the next thing, and then it's a conspiracy to steal his wife. And I'm sure that he spent the next 20 years wondering why in the world he ever listened to God and just didn't stay in his damn tent, you know. But there's and the Abrahamic story and the stories that follow that they all have that same narrative structure, is that there's this call to adventure, but it's not to happiness by any stretch of the imagination. It's to a heroic mode of being that involves taking responsibility for the full catastrophe. And that in that adoption of that adventurous mode of being, there's a deep meaning to be found. Right? A meaning maybe that transcends just you, that involves your family and that involves your community and maybe even the destiny of humanity itself. But there's nothing about that that's secure or easy, and very little that has to do with happiness. The idea that your problems should be solved for you, let's say, and that it's unfair that you have them, well, it's attractive in that there's nothing for you to do except complain. But it's horrifying in that there's nothing for you to do except complain. The difficulty is actually, the funny thing is the difficulty is actually the destiny. And it is insanely difficult, but maybe you're insanely up to the task. You know, and I would also say, there is evidence for this, you know, in the clinical literature. We know that one of the main strategies that you can use to help people cure themselves is for them to grapple with what they're terrified by. Grapple with what they're terrified so badly that they're avoiding, and to learn to confront it in pieces, in stages, in manageable stages. Not too much, you know, because you can hurt yourself, but not too little, because then it's pointless. And it works. It makes people not less vulnerable, but more courageous and stronger, which is better than being less vulnerable, because good luck with that. That's not happening. But you can be more courageous and you can be stronger. And if you take on the burden of confronting the catastrophe of your existence, then that happens. And it actually works. And that's part of what everyone is called upon to discover in their life, and partly what religious stories try to remind people of. In some sense, to wake them up, say, you're more than you think you are. And this is another thing I realized on this tour, actually. I hadn't conceptualized this properly before. There's this old idea that the hero rescues his father from the abyss, or from the belly of a great monster, the dead father. You see that reflected in stories like Pinocchio in the Disney movie, because the puppet rescues Geppetto from the belly of a whale, the most terrifying possible place, at the bottom of the lowest possible abyss. And what that means is this, is that if you stare, and this is the answer to the Nietzschean dilemma. Nietzsche said, beware of staring. If you look long into an abyss, then the abyss looks into you. Well, if you look long enough into an abyss, then you discover something at the bottom of it. And what you discover at the bottom of it is your dead father. And what that means is that if you look at what terrifies you forthrightly enough, then you discover the spirit of your ancestors that you could become. And that won't be called out of you without that courageous confrontation, because nothing is called out of you without it being demanded.
There is substantial medical and scientific evidence to show that only when you're in a pleasant state of experience, your body and your brain works at its best. There's no argument about that. There's enough evidence to show that. So whatever impact or success or reaching goals or growth or whatever you say, on one level in the physical world, it's about how well you harness your physiological and your psychological process, isn't it? Whether your body and mind works against you or works for you, this is a big difference. So there is enough evidence to show only when you're in pleasant levels of experience, this happens best. If you're joyful constantly and you have no fear of suffering because you understand all human experience comes from within you, and so you have managed to create the kind of experience that you want, Now growth is possible unbridled. If you have the fear of falling down and suffering, you will not go very high, isn't it?
So how do you work through that? How do you help people on that path?
Many ways to look at it. One of the simplest ways to see it is all human experience has a chemical base. Right now, let us say you're joyful. If you look at your chemistry, it'll be in a certain way. Let's say you're miserable. If you check your chemistry, it'll be in a completely different way. Now we have a technology that with which you create a chemistry of blissfulness. So my chemistry is blissful, doesn't matter what's happening. The drama around me is happening in so many different ways. But this is a privilege that I've kept for myself. Me being joyful or miserable, me being peaceful or disturbed, these privileges I have not given it to anybody else, I kept them to myself. I think every human being should do that. That the privileges of the nature of your experience must be in your hand. Because when you try to act in the world, there are many forces. All of them will not always cooperate. Sometimes they cooperate, many times they will not cooperate, many times they'll turn against you. This is the nature of the world. That's how it should be. World will never happen 100% your way. And I'm glad it is so, because if it all happened your way, where do I go? I'm glad it's not happening your way. Little bit my way, little bit your way, little bit somebody else's way. That's how the world should be.
God really does want to use you as an example of what He can do. You just gotta volunteer, but you gotta be willing to go through something to get to it. Success ain't free. They ain't passing out money, man. Anybody sending none to your house. That ain't how this works. You got to go get it. But in order to go get it, you gotta want something. You gotta have vision boards. You gotta have stuff you dream about. You gotta have this stuff written down. That being successful is not an accident. Hey man, stop thinking, man, that your life is over because you're a certain age. Who are you to determine? You know what I can't stand when I hear Christians say, well, I guess it was the Lord's will. If it was the Lord's will, I would have had some money by now. No, you can't dump that on God. God's will is that you prosper. That's His will. Now, the fact that you done made some adverse decisions to stop your prosperity train from happening, don't dump that on Him. God comes to give you life and give you life more abundantly. That's what He say. Well, then the question is, where your abundant at? You're going down to church, you're memorizing all these scriptures. Why don't you apply some of them? He come to give you life and give you life more abundantly. God got a great life for you, man, but you gotta want something. You gotta want it, you gotta write it down. Most people don't have what they want in life because it ain't written down nowhere. Say no philosophy. This a fact. What you waiting on? Write it down. Put some faith on it. And then get ready to go to work. Sit up and you can believe in God all you want, but if you don't work, man, it ain't gonna happen. Because He told you that, though. He said faith without works is dead. I'm just asking you, man, to try something new. If you've tried everything, it ain't worked for you. I'm just asking you, just try writing it down. Just try writing it down. Go home and read Habakkuk 2:2 and see if you don't get the feeling He talking to you. After you write it down, I want you to put some faith on it. When you put some faith on it, I want you to work for it. I want you to believe in your heart that you will have it. Now, you might not want this life. You might not want what it takes to get here. But if you want this life, you got to put in your work. You got to put it in. You got to stay prayerful. You got to never give up. You got to talk to God every day. Now, if that ain't what you want to do, then good luck. You keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to keep getting what you've been doing. All I ever asked God for was to let me eat. Let me sit at the table with the big boy. Take me from this homelessness that I'm in and fill my coffers with spoil. You know how much I have today? I have more than I ever thought I'd ever have. I got more. God done gave me more than I asked for, because He got this thing He has called grace. Grace is, I wish I could buy it. You know, I wish I could buy grace, man. I was playing golf with an old guy that owns the Mayo Clinic. The Mayo Clinics. You know how much money you got to have to own all of them? I'm playing golf with this guy and he taught me something. He said, Steve, listen to this. You seem like a spiritual guy. I want to share something with you. He said, justice is when you get what you deserve. Mercy is when you don't get what you deserve. He said, but grace is different from both of them. Grace is when you get what you don't deserve.
you.